All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming today. We have really excited to introduce you to Jennifer. Let me know if I butcher this name, Bryan-Goforth.
That's right.
Um, awesome, of Washington State University, who will be presenting on her very cool food preservation lending library concept. And before we do that, I'm just going to drop a few things in the chat. Um, and yeah, so we just launched a whole new social media setup thanks to our AmeriCorps Vista, Jen Roberts. Yay, Jen. She's here somewhere. Hi. So please follow us on Instagram. I've dropped a link into the chat where at Washington Gleaning Network, we'll be using this platform pretty regularly to share resources and feature stories about your organizations and announcing upcoming events and so on. And final quick announcement. We will be taking a break from meetings in December due to all of the holiday activity, but we'll be coming back together in January to do a really big 2 hour storytelling workshop with Laura Porfirio of Creative Narrations. Her bio is linked in the chat as well. This is such an excellent opportunity, not only to work with a professional storyteller, but also reflect on your organization's own stories and impact right at the beginning of the year. So perfect timing. And I'll be sending out calendar invites for that and information packets soon. So keep an eye out for all of that. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Jennifer.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Jennifer Bryan-Goforth. I work with Washington State University. I've been working for them for over 13 years. Um, My work with WSU is also kind of informed by a couple decades of experience as an organic farmer and a longtime food preserver. So I get to do a lot of cool things when I work at WSU that I have practical experience with doing in my the rest of my life. Um, so my academic background is in education. I'm not like a research scientist or something. So it's really about education and a focus on curriculum development and differentiated instruction. So this framework guides my work through extension programming and I think applies in this program as well. So I like to prioritize like inclusive, learner-centered kind of strategies that, help make learning accessible to a lot of different types of learners, diverse needs, learning styles, different access points, that kind of thing. So I like to design educational experience that like really are going to foster confidence, build practical skills, and increase long-term engagement. So this project integrates kind of that philosophy and framework into a replicable model that connects food recovery organizations with preservation education and tool lending libraries, with the idea of expanding access, reducing waste, and building community resilience. So I will also say that I presented this at a conference in Michigan last week, I think, maybe the week before. And so this slide deck is was designed primarily like for that presentation. And so it's we might fast forward through a few things that are not necessarily applicable here or as applicable. So let's see here. Let's go to the next one. So, this is no big news to you to this audience, but yeah, globally, a third of all food produced is wasted. So this is a huge loss of resources, right? So, but really, what's I think especially important is where that waste happens. And so, research shows food waste at the household level has the greatest environmental impact because all of those inputs, like water, labor, transport, packaging, they've already been spent. And so that's why it's so critical to not only empower people with the tools and the knowledge to recover food through extending its life through preservation. Um, so let's see here. I think my next slide. Okay, so um, food banks, gleaners, food pantries, all those kinds of organizations that work with food recovery play a critical role in rescuing that surplus food and making sure it reaches those who need it. So, as you all know, often a big percentage of this type of food is really highly perishable. So, if it doesn't get used up quickly, it still ends up going to waste even after all the effort of saving it has happened. And even, I'm sure that happens, you know, uh, even if food recovery organizations are distributing the food before it goes bad, then, then you're concerned still about when it gets to the household, are people, how much is going into waste. So, I've worked with food recovery organizations for a long time, and over the years, we've really noticed a pattern where the same households receiving the food often lacked access to the tools or the knowledge to preserve it effectively. So, without a way to extend that shelf life, those good food recovery efforts couldn't fully prevent waste. And, in thinking about this, right, most people don't own things like pressure canners or dehydrators, and many have never been taught to use them safely. It's interesting. It used to be an extension that in every county in the state, there was a food preservation specialist. That has changed over the years. Drastically changed. It used to be something that was funded, a funded position. Someone would do a part-time job, working in food preservation. And I have an unusual role now that instead of it being a commonplace option. So I have technically I am funded through Skagit County and through San Juan County, but then I most of my position is now at the state level through food systems, and that is has been a really great benefit because it allows me to work across the state rather than be limited geographically to the counties that are actually funding part of my position. Um, Most counties don't opt to fund a role like this. And so there are very, very few of us. Some years I'm the only person teaching public facing like consumer-based classes on food preservation with extension in our state. Um, on the years that I'm not, when there are other people doing it, it's very minimal. It would be something that would be a very small part of someone's role. They might teach a class a year. And sometimes there's only two or three people across the state. So it's really has been, kind of a hardship because a lot of people who are interested in food preservation just don't have access to those classes anymore. They don't really exist in the same way. So then what people do, right, is they look online, they look at food bloggers, they receive all this information. That may or may not be safe and effective. There's a lot of like information on social media that's actually pretty dangerous, really not safe, and also, maybe is more designed to have this wow factor to get views rather than something that is like really highly useful in a household food setting. So we basically saw this opportunity, and over the years, we've talked about at this particular organization, the Skagit Gleaners, we've talked about doing a lending library. Um, we thought that that could be a good combination, doing education and creating that tool lending library to improve food access at the household level and make sure that people had the tools and the education they needed to safely preserve that food and reduce waste. So, the Skagit Gleaners is the focus of this particular program. I've done some similar things like this in the past, but they've been more, I guess, a little less formal. There are some lending libraries across the state, but they don't necessarily align with food recovery organizations. Like sometimes Grange associations will have food preservation tools or lending library. There's a few like tribal communities that will have those kinds of materials available, but it's something that I think there should be a lot of. Skagit Gleaners is a local food recovery organization to me, and really super conveniently, Leanne, who she and I work together on this, is on this Zoom, so she is available. She can answer some questions or give some more information. Um, so we were partners in this work. So their mission centers on reducing food waste while building the equitable food system. And you may be familiar with this, but here's kind of overview of their model. And they also offer a weekly public distribution option. So they operate like a shopping model food bank for lower income households in on once a month. I'm sorry, once a week. for this. So it's a great organization, and I've taught food preservation classes there more for 10 years anyway, occasionally. But this was a particular program that we created that was going to take place over the year. So this was kind of a surplus to storage program. It was a collaborative effort. We really wanted to expand to create a larger program, especially one that could include that lending library component. Because lack of access to tools always comes up as a barrier. When I'm teaching classes, people are like, "Oh yeah, I would love to be able to do this, but I don't have the money, or I don't to purchase this expensive piece of equipment, or I don't have the storage, right? Like I live in a small apartment. How am I going to store all these food preservation tools?" So the director and I met to discuss some future possibilities, and she applied for funding. We were able to secure a grant through the Washington State Department of Ecology for a one-year program. The food preservation program was a small component of that grant. If I'm correct in remembering, I think the total was around 150,000, and we got around 20,000 for this component. So the goal was really to reduce waste and improve food security by teaching those food preservation skills and providing the access to the tools to do it safely at home. So the educational component included 12 workshops. So we wanted to do a workshop once a month focused on safe research-based food preservation practices. We primarily used Zoom to deliver classes. We created a Google Classroom where participants could access all manner of materials, publications, videos, links, class recordings. We wanted to make sure that the workshops were practical and minimize barriers to preserving. And let's see here. I think I've got a list of those. Yeah. Um, so workshops were held monthly. Each lasted 60 to 90 minutes, kind of depending on the class. You know, these classes were things that I had, I had taught in the past, but we kind of selected them and then customized them to the Gleaner audience because one of the things that was really great about teaching this is that I didn't have to convince anyone that any of these things were a good idea. That's really different when working with people who are accessing food through food recovery organizations. They want to prevent food waste. It's already something that is like of value to them, and so it was great. And so I could just add in things, and I didn't have to explain why it was important. So really we were, I designed it from a household food system management perspective. So the idea was like embedded in every class, right? How do we access food currently? How can we address waste and access at each of the levels, right? So how do you source food? What about short-term storage, long-term storage? What about when you prepare food? What about consumption? So when I was teaching these, the goal was to build in easy strategies at each of those levels that work for individual households. So like my system probably doesn't work for my neighbors. My current system that I have for household food management would not have worked well when I had young children in my house, right? So what I really try to do is encourage folks to collect data and then have a growth mindset and kind of continually observe, assess, make adjustments to their uh, system so that they can improve that access to nutritious food and reducing household food waste. So we covered a broad range of preservation topics. We started off with presenting food waste, so that was kind of the umbrella class, like how food preservation might have play a role in that. And then the first four classes, water bath canning, pressure canning, pickling and fermentation, freezing, drying, and microclimate storage. That's kind of a standard four-part series that I teach. So those are process oriented. So it, kind of teaches how to do those different techniques. And then we moved on to a few crop specific sessions for foods that are typically available in large quantities through the gleaners. Um, and then there were a couple of fun ones like preserved foods for gifting was kind of a good one. We also decided to add a gardening with food preservation in mind. So how to select varieties or use planting techniques to increase your yield and plan to preserve. Like how do you select different types of different varieties that are going to be better suited for food preservation, that kind of thing. So recordings were provided for flexible access and for future access after the grant cycle. So that's kind of a cool thing about this is that when we taught this, not only could people attend live. They could also watch the recordings, but also when that we didn't have grant funding any longer, they have an archive of these instructional videos that all members 3, 4, 5 years out, whatever, can access them and participate, even so we don't have to have ongoing funding for this. Um, also the videos are great because you might take a class, in June, and in September you're going to apply some of that knowledge and you're like, wait, what did that say? I can't remember. There was some tips. So being able to go back and refer to that as you need to was also helpful. So the lending library tour was a hit. It We should have probably, in retrospect, put it at the beginning, but it wasn't because this was a new program and there were some logistical things. Um, we ended up putting it kind of later. I taught this one on site. We live streamed it on Facebook as well as recorded it via Zoom so people could attend live in person or remote, or they could watch the recording. It was also a good opportunity, I think, for staff to learn more about those tools available to the members because if they were promoting the lending library or people had questions, like, oh, I've never used this tool. What do you think about this? They were able to have more information and give some instruction. Uh, I want to just share some of the materials that were included in the lending library portion. So the this is a series that I sort of created with a couple help from a couple colleagues we kind of did it during the pandemic. What I was noticing is there was an old series of crop sheets, so focused on a specific crop and some preservation techniques that had been developed like in the 80s and 90s, and it was just like really outdated. It was not pretty. They were all kind of different formatting, and so we decided to kind of redo them, change up some of the recipes and the suggestions, make sure they fit with like modern recommendations, and make it something that was interesting and visually compelling. So we created a series there's more than 25 different crops represented, and these are Washington State crops. So this is a resource that already was in existence, and then the gleaners printed out copies of these and included them in a binder at the lending library. This is also a really great resource just for food recovery organizations because if you had a ton of apples come in or a ton of Brussels sprouts or something, basically there's a blurb, about the crop, the nutrition, selection, and storage information, the visual measurements, right? So how many apples might go into a pound kind of thing, and then how many cups might come from a pound. Anyway, and then also each one of these has freezing, drying, and a boiling water bath canning option. And so uh, we picked recipes for the canning that were very straightforward, popular, easy. So this was designed for somebody who really didn't have experience to just kind of jump in and take advantage of a seasonal bulk produce. These are also really great for farmers, right? So farmers can share these out at like with CSA clients, they can print them and have them at farmers markets so they can hand them out during strawberry season. Like, oh yeah, oh you want to make jam you've never done it before? Here's a publication on how to do that. So these are printed and were available. And then we have some like pretty classic publications. There's a bunch of these through Washington State University. There's actually quite a number through there's like a group of Pacific Northwest University, so Oregon, Idaho, and Washington. We kind of have collaborated to make these publications. There's a variety of these that were also printed and made available. And then, of course, all of these things were also posted in the Google Classroom, and so people have access to them that way. But yeah, we wanted a lot of things to be free, downloadable. The only one on here that I think the Gleaners have a copy of this, the So Easy to Preserve book. That's a purchased book. And Leanne, if you don't have a copy, I can drop one off sometime. But this is a one that we would recommend if people were going to have a lending library and we're going to purchase a book. It's just really a pretty thorough book. Okay, so let's look at some pictures here. So really, I teach a lot of education classes, and I love teaching, but for this program, one of the most exciting components was that lending library. So we had about $6,000 allocated for tools and setup. And so I went through and really looked at, what tools I thought would be the most useful. This was helpful because, or my experience was helpful in creating this because I have a lot of experience with all these tools. I own all of these tools. I have owned lots of other tools. And so have used them, have practical experience. There's lots of things that look like they would be a good idea, but then, they're kind of gimmicky or they don't actually improve the efficiency with preserving food. So we kind of came up with a list. I think this was my original kind of list. Um, and they included things like pressure canners. We tried to focus on things that were high cost tools that people would use frequently, and maybe would be a little bit more difficult to purchase for themselves. So steam juicers, pressure canners, dehydrators. The tools are stored in secure lockers and they are tracked through a checkout system. And so then we can see down here, there's the checkout system there. One neat thing about the early iteration of this checkout process, I think the layout of this has changed on during their checkout process, but the participants were asked to include the approximate number of pounds preserved when checking out their tool. And so that's pretty cool because that gives you a data point that you can then use to, justify the lending library, ask for more funding, that kind of thing. You're like, oh, we saved 5,000 pounds of food, this year by having this lending library kind of thing. So then we have printed guides and crop sheets to help those users navigate tool usage efficiently. So that's what that one looks like. Let's see. There's some more pictures, a little closer look of some other things in the library. So everything from like manual and electric food mills to pressure canners. Okay, they also have a fruit press, like down here on the bottom left. I wanted to, when we were looking at the list, I wanted to have a cider press, right? Cider press is something that is prohibitively expensive and large for most households. Like, it doesn't make any sense for people to own those. But there are some that are portable, that are, size wise, sort of just have the same capacity as a sort of traditional model, but can fold up and fit in the back of a Honda, right? So this is kind of a cool resource. So we have pressure canners in here. We opted for pressure canners that were, kind of top of the line models, because we anticipated they were going to get a lot of use. There's even cool things like this picture of with the tomatoes on the top. That's a electric food mill that can process about 250 pounds of tomatoes per hour into sauce, and it removes the seeds, stems, skins, kind of thing. So really try to focus on those high quality tools, all American canners, Excalibur dehydrators, that kind of thing, for the high use and also kind of an upgrade from what members might typically be able to purchase on their own. We intentionally left out everyday kitchen tools, and we really focused on those types of equipment that people are unlikely to own due to cost or space. And then, so the idea was that that shared access model could make it more possible, and help the rescued food get processed quickly and safely. And then also there's a picture here of the binder that they have with a bunch of the printed materials. Okay, so this is some information around the outcomes of the educational lending life program. There was some qualitative and quantitative data. Some of the administration was handled through the gleaners, and we had a staff change, I don't know, a third of the way through, half the way through. And so Leanne sort of had to step into this new role, and things were partially started, and some things were, were probably easy to pick up, and some things were kind of like really confusing. And so she did an awesome job of doing that. But that meant that some of the data I didn't have necessarily full access to it. But for the first 6 months, we had so the first six classes, we saw 427 registered participants. And then we asked people how many people were also attending in your household, like viewing via Zoom. And that was about 712, showing some strong community interest. And then we had 227 post or like recording views for those. Um, Really, this showed that I think that flexibility was key to reaching more participants over time. And then we had some post-class surveys, like a little poll for the online classes when people were attending live. And so 100% of those people who completed the surveys said they increased their knowledge. Just as importantly, 100% intended to apply that knowledge. So we think that shows that our content was like relevant and accessible and motivating. So the library usage, there was a high demand for certain types of equipment, especially for tools like pressure canners and dehydrators that were kind of expensive or bulky. Um, and then, the behavior change, this was really the most exciting thing, right? That members are actively preserving food that would have otherwise gone to waste. And food recovery staff have noted less spoilage and more storage amongst their clients. Um, you know, s- Points to real tangible impacts, right? Skills are being applied, food's being saved, the system is working. So let's see here. So, there was a pre-program survey that the original Gleaner staff member created. I didn't have input on that survey before it went. I didn't see it before it went out. And Leanne was not working on this project at that point. The pre-program survey, I would have probably made some edits to it. One of the things they asked was about, preferences around classes. And in-person classes were like hands down the thing that people thought that they wanted. In experience, like personal experience in teaching classes, I think that is I think people like that idea, but it's not usually very practical. It's particularly not practical in this setting because we knew that we didn't have like a teaching kitchen available. So the information that I would be sharing online was basically the same thing that would be happening if I was standing in front of people in person. Um, if we were canning in together in a teaching kitchen where people were able to have small groups and be participating in doing that, that would be a different situation. But in those situations, the barrier is also that of time because I could teach a 75-minute class on pressure canning online and give lots of information, some video resources for people to follow up. But if people wanted to can in person and do a hands-on class, that's like a 4-hour class. So then we have the barrier of attendance and taking off time from work and scheduling and childcare and all those things. So the participation didn't really match with this preference, and that was not a surprise to me. Um, Day and evening classes, they kind of seem to have equal registration. We didn't ever seem to figure out that there was a strong preference for either, so we kind of just offered both. Um, we did initially pilot a hybrid model with childcare on site, and then it discontinued due to low turnout. This was again something that I think was initially based on that survey. We thought, the requests were like, we want to do this in person and we need some childcare, but it was very, very low attendance. And then we realized, like, if you're watching it from your living room, you don't need to have the childcare and you don't need to get kids dressed and drive and come to the Gleaners location. Um, let's see here. In the early phase of the program, we saw that live classes had very high registration and high attendance, but over time, we saw a shift. Participants increasingly favored watching recordings on their own schedule. Um, there's a couple of different reasons for that. I think one is the content, or I'm sorry, the process classes are always the most popular over crop specific classes. So it possibly was the content, but also, um, a primary reason is that attending live versus recorded is the ability to ask questions, discuss topics, but we provided multiple platforms for this. So we had Google Classroom, there's the Gleaners Facebook group, there's a food preservation Facebook group that I run, and then also just like the community of the Gleaners, people being able to have experience and share that knowledge informally with others and act sort of as this peer mentoring. Folks were able to access that even when utilizing those asynchronous recordings instead of live classes. So I think that was one of the reasons. And then It's also important, I think, to highlight that some members really became these sort of informal ambassadors for the program, actively sharing what they learned, help encouraging others to try it, helping normalize food preservation as a solution for managing surplus food. Let's see here. So one of the most organic and rewarding aspects of this program is how visible the impact became through the Facebook group. This is like evaluation gold, from a university perspective. Like this is like really amazing stuff. We usually, we have to have things like focus groups and incentives and just paying people to complete surveys and that kind of thing to get this kind of information. And it just, people were posting because they were enthusiastic, and they had a good platform that was built into their system that they could share those things. So members regularly post photos, tips, and stories of their preservation projects. The public sharing then builds that culture of learning and support, especially for those trying new methods for the first time. And for us, right, it's a form of evaluation. When we see tool specific posts like the dehydrator in action or someone making sauce with the food mill, it confirms the lending library is being used as intended. So I also have that separate regional, like Washington State food preservation group, which has also been helpful because that one I'm the admin for, and so people can ask questions. It also operates as a database. So if someone's like wanting to know something about pickles, they can search in the Facebook group for all the posts about pickles, and maybe their questions just answered so they don't have to wait for that. And many Gleaner members are part of that group also. So these posts are authentic, unprompted, easy to document. So they're a great example of community-driven feedback and peer learning in action. And then here's a few more. So one interesting outcome of this too is that staff, I heard some feedback from staff that they became familiar with the members who were checking equipment out, right? Or sharing posts online. Then staff could identify those sort of food preservation champions, and they were able to reach out to specific members when they had a surplus of highly perishable food that was left over. Maybe a shop happened and they had 50 pounds of tomatoes left over and they didn't, they really needed to get used up in the next 24 hours. And so they just needed to find a home for them. Instead of composting them or going to waste, they would contact one of those champions who would then pick up the food and the needed tools and make sure those surplus items didn't go in the compost bin. And I thought that was pretty cool. And yeah, so here's some more pictures. And some of these are videos, like I love that someone posted a video of the steam juicer, and then there's a video of it in action. The picture on the right is a still from a video of kids, enthusiastically making applesauce with one of the tools from the lending library. I mean, it's yeah, it's great. I'm super excited about that. Um, Let's see here. And then, so what's happening now? I'm developing a toolkit. This was not necessarily part of the grant, the toolkit, but I think it is really appropriate and will be useful to support others who want to implement a similar program. So the primary objective of the toolkit is replication. We want others to be able to adapt this model to fit their own community's needs. It includes strategies like how to identify the right partners, like food banks or gleaner groups or that kind of thing. How can extension play a role? What are the resources that already exist? Tips for aligning goals around waste reduction and food access. I want to include a little bit of information too about like how we have this partnership with the Gleaners, but I've created programs with, in collaboration with other organizations. And so how can we do that? How can you talk your county commissioners into funding something like this, that kind of thing? Um, and so basically what some of the takeaways on this and will be included in the toolkit is, we thought that the 6,000 was a pretty good amount for a baseline budget for a tool lending library. It seemed to be a pretty realistic baseline. And it was really important to select tools that are user friendly and impactful. So one thing that we learned, while that initial tool list was, I kind of, provided was like researched, the original staff member, not Leanne, but the other person who coordinated the purchasing made some well-intentioned substitutions, but they didn't have a lot of personal experience with food preservation. So they took some of the budget from the original list and used it for some things like 1 gallon fermentation crocks, mason jar air sealers, things like that. And those have seen very, very little to use. They are less suited for lending because they either require long-term use, like if you have, 6 fermentation vessels and hundreds of gleaner members, someone might have to check that out for 2 months. And so it really isn't a good fit. These long-term kind of tools. And we don't need to spend a bunch of money on Crocs when you could have a glass jar or a plastic food grade bucket that will work just fine. Or they're niche products, right? That participants would maybe prefer to own individually. So with this, we want others to be able to adapt curriculum to include not just preservation techniques, but also recipes and strategies that are useful for culturally relevant and locally grown foods. Now, with WSU, we are there are some pretty strict guidelines on what kind of information we can share regarding food safety. And I think this is where you can get some you can gain some support for programs if for food banks or gleaner organizations kind of thing, because the food safety deal is a real concern, and people are sometimes concerned about supporting something like this because what about the responsibility? If someone shares information and someone gets sick, what if a botulism outbreak happens because people are canning? So as long as you are relying on these free recommendations that are available through the university system or through the National Center for Home Food Preservation, USDA kind of thing, then those have all been well tested and are reputable, and you don't have to worry about that in the same way. And I build that in when I'm teaching the classes, how to find those resources and why those are so important. So that being said,
Jennifer,
yeah,
sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry. We're coming up to time, and I was just wondering
okay.
if we wanted to wrap up and open up for discussion.
Yeah, that's great. I have like 2 more quick slides. Yeah, so just being able to adapt some of those things would be useful. We don't have recipes for every type of food. Some things are not safe to preserve at home in certain ways, but yeah. So then, program logistics matter, and those will be in the toolkit. Really, it's also essential that we want to meet audiences where they are. And today, that often means reaching beyond traditional in-person workshops or printed materials. So, offering food education through multiple formats, live sessions, recordings, printable guides, digital handouts, videos, that kind of thing. And obviously, social media is a pretty big component of that. And so I'll have some of that information in the toolkit. And then just the last slide here. Um, a key direction is working with some tribal nations. I have some different tribes that I work with on this topic, and who have developed or are continuing to develop some lending library programs. I did just apply for a grant, a specialty crop grant. And if we're funded, which I think we'll know in January or February, maybe, if we're funded, this would allow me to do a statewide partnership with food recovery organizations there and fund 6 new lending libraries across the state with other organizations. So we've applied for this grant. If we don't get funded, we'll just apply and use this and try to do it again with a different organization or some different funder. I'm pretty sure this will be funded sometime in the next year or two. It's just a really research-based, very effective program, and I think it's a good program that will likely get funded. So if you are interested in that kind of thing, then when and if that happens, I can make some connections with folks. So that's it. That's my presentation. Oh, and if you want to sign up to receive the toolkit when it's ready, you can do that there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was really informative. And I feel like I have so many questions, and I think there are some folks in the chat as well that have questions. Are you able to drop that link to your sign up into the chat? That would be super helpful. Thanks.
That's what I'm doing right now.
Um, And I think some of the questions could be answered by like that toolkit that you'll be sending out here soon. But there were a few in the chat, and I could just read through them real quick because I know we're coming up to time a little bit. But um, Devin was asking like what kind of credentials a food preservation specialist would need to know if they were teaching best safe practices. I know this is a big question, and I assume that's also uh, touched on in the toolkit as well, but are you able to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I can just answer that really quick. There is a training usually every other year at WSU, and potentially it could be attended by people outside of WSU. Um, there used to be master food preserver programs. There are not anymore. The last one in the state ended last year. I'm hoping to get some funding to be able to offer that because then that one would be easy. I could train people and to be master food preservers, and then they could do some of that education out in the community. But right now, it would be that annual training would probably be the best option. And it's like 40 hours of training.
Do you know what it's called?
Well, you'd probably have to email me because it's not usually posted in a public facing
Okay.
way. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm just going to try to get through a few of these other questions. Devin also asked about a list of the things you purchased for the lending library. Is that also going to be in the toolkit?
Yeah. Yep. That will be in there.
Wonderful. Awesome. I'm so excited to share that out with everyone as well. Um, and let me know if I missed anything. Emily is asking, do any of the materials focus on what to do with second quality purchase, like buggy apples and that kind of thing?
Yeah, and so some of that the materials not necessarily I think they're like peer-reviewed publications is a huge process to get something like published through the university, but the classes that I teach do because you know produce is not all perfect, and so like buggy apples, if I'm teaching a class on apples, I would be like here, you know, here's what you can do with this kind of damage. You can make applesauce out of this, or you could use the best apples for this kind of microclimate storage, or oh, you could press cider, and that's something that could be done with, you know, codling moth damage or that kind of thing. So,
Awesome, thank you. And I missed a question from Stephanie. She asked if the classes were publicly available.
they aren't, because they were funded through the Gleaners organization. So those are a membership organization, and those are for their members. And it's a little bit challenging because we want the information to be available, but also when I'm teaching classes, they tend to be fee-based classes, and then that money allows me to then teach and cover any expenses for programs that don't have funding, right? So public-facing classes for me mostly are fee-based. But so we ask that participants don't post record, you know, any kind of recording online, that kind of thing. The resources are all available, but the classes aren't. So the toolkit, one of the things that I ask in that questionnaire is, are you interested in like basically the framework and all the resources, a version like that, that would probably just be free? Or is it, are you also interested in a version that would be, that it would include class recordings and all of, you know, include this whole system so that it was basically like plug and play, like you don't have to have staff trained on this. And in which case that probably would be, I guess, a curriculum that was fee-based, but I'm just trying to find out which are most helpful at this point.
Gotcha. Awesome. Well, we're up to time, so to respect everyone's time, I don't want to like continue asking questions. That's Jennifer has dropped her email in the chat, and there's a sign up to the toolkit. And if it's okay, Jennifer, is it all right for me, like once I receive the toolkit, to also send it out to Gleaners as a resource,
Yep.
if you're offering that? So I'll definitely be doing that. So keep an eye out. Thank you guys so much for coming. So excited for your resource, Jennifer, and really excited to work with you in the future. Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.